Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Rose Report. Tonight, I'm joined by Calvin Robinson, an Anglican deacon in the Free Church of England and a commentator in the UK. Thank you so much for coming on.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
So I wanted to have you on because I've seen you a lot in UK media and the US media, and I've noticed that you've talked quite a bit about the impact of your church for young people in the UK. So just to start off, how does your church serve young people in the UK and reach out to them in a way that maybe other churches haven't?
Honestly, by just doing church, by just focusing on what the church has done for 2,000 years. I think the mistake that a lot of churches make today is by trying to reach out to the young people. And there's always this assumption that young people are a particular demographic that like particular things. And people often forget that young people are just as diverse as any other type of demographic. There will be people that prefer traditional worship, people that prefer more evangelical worship. There will be people that prefer liturgical, people non-liturgical. It doesn't make sense to try to attract a younger crowd. I think the approach to take is to focus on what has been known to work traditionally and just do church.
And that's interesting because here in the US, we have quite a few youth efforts, but we don't necessarily have a spread the faith effort. So are you seeing a lot of young people interested in just faith as a concept or trying to get back to faith right now?
Absolutely. I think there's kind of a counter-revolution going on because in the secular world, people are free in the loosest term of the word to do whatever they like. People are free from God, people are free from consequences, people are free to do whatever they want without any consequence for the wider community or for themselves. And that's actually not freedom. That is just slavery in sin. That is people being trapped in debauchery and degeneracy. And actually true freedom comes from God. True freedom comes within the boundaries of the Holy Scriptures. It comes, boundaries in general. People need to know what is ordered, what is not ordered, what is good and what is evil. And without that, we're lost. So I found that people are searching and people are looking for faith, and they're looking for it in lots of different ways. But this is why we have to be true to the faith and try not to make our churches appear just like any other secular society, any other secular club, because it's not a society, it's not a club. Church is the body of Christ. It's different, it's true, and it's holy.
And I wanted to know because of that, because you're seeing more of an influx here in the US, we're seeing a lot of people who are entering their early 30s, who seem to be, without a guide, who seem to be struggling. Maybe they've been very successful professionally, but personally in relationships, they're really struggling. So there is sort of this influx in the early 30s range. Are you seeing that in the UK? And if so, are they being vocal about it? Are they sharing why they're coming back to church or discovering church for the first time?
Yeah, massively so. This is the case that we've been told for so long that we have to strive for, we have to worship mammon. We have to strive for career ambitions and goals. We have to try to earn a certain amount of money to be successful. And being successful is all that matters. And it's about your place in the world rather than focusing on what's right and true. And actually, rather than looking inward, looking outward or looking upward. So rather than thinking, what makes me personally happy and chasing that, because that's a never-ending obsession that you cannot ever actually achieve. If you set your goal and I want to earn £1 million before I'm 30, you earn that £1 million and then what? Either you're lost of objectives or you have to set an even bigger one. And it's not fulfilling. You don't find contentment in that way. If we focus on what the scriptures show us and how to live a good life rather than how to live a nice life, what is good is a family. It's finding someone to marry, preferably quite young, settling down, starting your own family for the greater worship of God and centering your life on Christ. So going to church as a family, teaching your children what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's bad, and there you find fulfillment. Of course, you can do other things, like you can make money, you can become successful in the secular world too, but not for your own personal wealth or gain, but because the whole purpose of creating wealth is to distribute wealth. The whole purpose of earning money is so that you can give to charity. If you're not doing that, it's selfish, it's sinful, and it's actually more lonely.
And we noticed here there's a lot of pushback against young people finding any sort of religion. So there is a very antagonistic attack from other young people who are maybe not finding religion, or even just older people who see it as sort of going backwards. Is there that antagonism in the UK against faith right now?
Yeah, of course. It's like, it's old-fashioned, it's outdated. Like you say, it's backwards. But what's wrong with that? I think if we look at the world around us, where people are lonelier, more isolated, more lost than they've ever been, even though we're richer than we've ever been. I mean, if you look at the poorest people in our Western societies now, they've all got $1,000 mobile phone, smartphone, for example. Like, we're so much richer financially than we have been throughout history, yet we are poorer in our spirit. And if we look at what's going on around us and think, actually, this isn't right, something isn't quite right, what's missing? That missing element is Christ. That missing element is faith. And so when people say, actually, I want to do something slightly different, why people reject that, why they look down their noses at us, is because they realize that something's wrong in themselves too and in their world too. And actually, by living a Christ-like life, by living a holier life, disregarding the worldly norms, you're setting yourself apart, and that disturbs people because it's their own insecurities that they're seeing in themselves. It's not you that they have an issue with; it's themselves, because they're not looking for the truth. They're not looking for beauty. They're not looking for goodness. They're looking for personal selfish gain, and they know that that's not what they should be doing.
And in terms of looking for that, I think there's been this sort of false idea that young people are so liberated and happy now, that there is all this happiness and nothing needs to be corrected. Are you seeing like sort of this generational sadness a little bit in young people who are struggling? Because here it's almost like we're not allowed to say there's any sadness. We're not allowed to say there's any loneliness or problems because we're supposed to be so far in the progressive future that's supposed to be ideal.
Yeah, the numbers speak for themselves. The statistics show that young people are more depressed now than they have ever been. And I'm like, why is that? You know, if they all have cars, they all have smartphones, they all have PlayStations, Xbox, flat screen TVs, they all go to university now. So everyone's incredibly intellectual and educated. Why are people more depressed now than they were previously? What is missing? And again, it always comes back to the faith. And we find that people who are rooted in something bigger than themselves, i.e. God, are happier than people who are constantly searching for something within, because you'll never find it within yourself, because that's not where it exists. So yeah, I think the divide is between those who have realized that and those who haven't yet. And I think it's on young people that are spiritual, are in connection with Christ, to kind of live a Christ-like life as an example to people around them. So I'm not talking about going out and preaching. I mean, if you want to do that, fantastic. But I'm just talking about living a Christ-like life, and people see that as a positive, attractive alternative. There's something special about that.
And just to switch gears a little bit, we recently had the coronation in the UK, and a lot of conservatives here are a little bit confused about why it should be so important, why so many, countries around the world want to cover it and send their representatives there. So as someone in the UK, why is it so important to the culture there, or to the morale?
Well, in America, you have the allegiance to the flag. In the UK, we swear allegiance to our king, and that's a physical embodiment of what it means to be British. It's someone that lives, is born, grows old, and dies. It reminds us of the cycle of life. It reminds us that we are mortal. It reminds us of our connection to each other. But it's also important because we are living beings, and we worship a living God. And in that ceremony, that is what it's all based on. The first thing that King Charles said was, not that what was it? I come not to be served, but to serve. And I mean, that's servant leadership that we learn from Christ. And the whole service was a Christian service. There was a consecration, there was an anointing, there was a Eucharist, the Holy Communion. It was all centered around Christ, actually, the King of Kings. But of course, our King is there to serve us as a people, but he's also there to serve the King of Kings, and to remind us that that's where it's divine authority. That's where any earthly power comes from him. So all of it is kind of linking us and rooting us, embedding us in our Christendom that we still embody.
And I think that might be a misconception here, how much of a faith element there is, because we see like the pomp and the pageantry and the stories, but that reaffirming back to the center sort of gets lost in the shuffle. And in your view, what is the role of the monarchy in the modern day Britain? Because obviously things have changed since the late Queen came to the throne. It's a different setup. There's different players. So what does the monarchy do for Britain at this point in history?
The monarchy is our checks and our balances. So we have a constitutional monarchy. So we have a parliamentary democracy. We elect parliamentary representatives to represent us as constituents, and they can never do anything too outlandish. They can never do anything they can never become fascist dictators, because whatever they want to pass has to get royal assent. Now, the king himself has no real power other than the power of veto. So he could say, no, that's not going to happen. So it's kind of a protective measure for the people against Parliament and against tyranny and dictatorship. It's much like your First and your Second Amendments, really. But it's a physical embodiment of that. But also, just having a monarchy roots us in our tradition. The first king of England was enthroned in the 10th century. We've had over 1,000 years of this lineage, maybe not direct lineage, but at least the tradition and the as you call it, the pomp and ceremony, but the service, that coronation service, much of that will not have changed in 1,000 years. And that's something that no other country in the world can say they have.
And do you see the coronation and sort of this resurgence in interest in the monarchy leading to any sort of resurgence in faith in a lot of people? Because we did just millions witnessed a massive Christian ceremony. They witnessed the king make vows and the queen make vows. So is there going to be, in your mind, sort of any good fallout from this on the faith level?
Absolutely. We had 20 million people tuning to watch a Holy Communion service.
Right.
They watched they watched our Prime Minister reading from the epistles. They watched the gospel being read, and they saw the body and blood of Christ being consumed. This is significant, and it's one of the biggest episodes of mission and evangelism in the world. The biggest one since Her Majesty the Queen's funeral, which was the biggest ever since the resurrection. I don't think there's 28 million people tuned in for that. I don't think there's ever been a Christian service bigger than that. So that's a fundamentally important thing that our monarchy does, and not to forget, our monarchy spread Christianity around the world, and they're still doing it, but in a different means.
So would you say that the prime minister is also able to work with the monarch? Because in the US, we have this idea of how do you have someone over the person who's been elected? So that person, the monarchy is not really over the prime minister, you would say, or over the government. They're just sort of acting as a checks and balances system.
No, they are over them. They're still over them. They don't have, so they don't have the power of an absolute monarch, so they can't rule us. They reign, they don't rule. But the prime minister serves at the behest of the king, and the prime minister can remove the king can remove the prime minister, and only the king can institute a new prime minister. So whenever we have an election, the leader of the winning party goes to the king and asks for permission to form a government, and only the king can dissolve a parliament and all of that kind of stuff. So the king does sit above the prime minister, who is the elected official, but that's because the king is part of the country. The king is the stability. Like, the king might see 10, maybe 20 prime ministers in his time, but the prime ministers come and go, but the king remains. So, I mean, in a US Republican system, the president is both the elected official and the head of state. And for me personally, that's too much power for one person to hold, because what are the checks and balances to hold them back if they remove the executive that are challenging them, like our prime minister did during the COVID pandemic. Our prime minister essentially said, we're no longer answerable to Parliament. We have a smaller cabinet that is going to look over laws for the coronavirus and putting lockdowns in place, that kind of stuff. The only person that can prevent that getting any worse is our king. But if it happens in a republic, who can step in and say, no, this has actually reached a point that this is tyrannous? I suppose this is why you have your gun laws as you do.
So you find a lot of comfort in having this sort of protective layer in your country that other countries don't, because you're right. Here, if it goes to Congress and the president signs it, we have pretty much no recourse until the next election. So do you find comfort in this system as you have it now in the UK?
Absolutely. I think the monarchy is a wonderful thing. I wouldn't want to be a democracy without a monarchy. I'd prefer an absolute monarchy to a direct democracy.
Well, I think a lot of people right now, based off of certain laws going through, would say the same throughout the world. And I wanted to know, just sort of in closing, what is your message to people who are saying, so many young people are not going into faith, faith is dying out, Christianity is dying out. What is your message as somebody interacting with young people really throughout the world on this level?
I would say, first of all, that's a lie, and ask, why are people wanting to paint that image? It's people kind of projecting, especially when older people talk about young people. It's like, young people are interested in this and that. Again, it's a presumption, and it's an incorrect one. I just got back from Rwanda, where so many young, faithful Christians they inspired me, actually. They gave me enthusiasm just seeing it. And I hope that they bring some of that back to the West, because we, as Great Britain, spread Christianity to these colonies, and I think now it's time for them to return and evangelize us and bring the gospel back to us, because in places like England and America, I think we're losing the gospel, actually. And Africa and Asia and the Middle East are actually strengthening their faiths, where we're losing it. So it's time for them to come back. But the point is that young people are waking up to what's happening in the West. West society is dying, not by accident, because I would call them neo-Marxists that are attacking us. Right. And they're attacking two things, and that is family and faith, because that is the way to break down Western society, because Western society was built on Christianity. And Christianity, it comes down to essentially Christ, but the way we live, it comes down to family and faith. So attack those things and you attack our way of life. So young people, I think, are waking up to that, and whether it's consciously or subconsciously, and the way to fight back against the wokeness and all of the ugliness and the lies that we see around us, the way to revert is to go back to the faith.
And I think that will resonate with a lot of people who don't want to live in the ugliness and want to seek out beauty, especially currently. Thank you so much for coming on. Where can people follow you on social media to keep up with your commentary and your actions?
Thank you again for the invitation. It was wonderful talking to you. People can reach me at calvinrobinson.com. All of my social medias are at Calvin Robinson, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. I've got a Substack as well, which is also Calvin Robinson. So thank you very much.
Perfect. And we'll link that all below. Thank you so much for coming on the Rose Report.
Cheers. God bless.
Thank you, Magdalene. Thank you, Calvin. Good job there, and we appreciate her coming on today. And we've got the one and only Magdalene Rose with us on the phone. Hadn't talked to this kid in a long time. How are you, kid?
I'm good. How are you?
I would call you, you're not a kid anymore. You're a college kiddo is what you are. But how's everything going with school? Everything good?
Yeah, everything's great.
Good deal. Hey, we'll mention Calvin. Good interview with him. And he was, for those that were listening, he was referring to the coronation of King Charles. What was your thoughts on all that? I'm not a big fan of the royals, but I guess in England's world, I guess how is this playing out with the young people? Was this a big deal this past weekend, or just a bunch of royals changing ownership?
No, it was a big deal, actually, throughout the world, and I think that's what's interesting. A lot of times America looks as if it's super connected to the rest of the world, but in reality, we're kind of on our own over here. You know, throughout the rest of the world, they have collective sports that they engage in. They have this level of, like, collaboration. So with the coronation, you had people from the Commonwealth countries. I think there's dozens of them, and they were coming from around the world to celebrate the coronation. They work with the monarchy. They work with the British government. And to me, it really highlighted how alone America is in a lot of ways, because you look at this coronation of the king and queen, and you see people from different areas throughout the world, from the tropical areas, from cold areas, from Europe, and you see this level of collaboration and cooperation that America, even more with this president, is really lacking. So it was a big deal worldwide, and I think even in the U.S. it was, maybe not as much in political circles, but it made a big impact because of the level of collaboration throughout the world that the U.S. is really currently missing out on.
Wow, interesting stuff. Listen, I got you on here for about 10 minutes or so, kid. I want to ask you a question. What was your take on this Durham thing yesterday? We got Ron Edwards coming up behind you tonight at 9 o'clock to talk about it, but I wanted to get your take on it, and then we'll talk about the border a little bit. What was your take? What's your take on this Durham report?
I don't think it's particularly surprising. I think a lot of times things that have to do with anything that like involves Russia and everything, there's a level of feeling within conservatives that no matter what comes out about it will be lies. So conservatives, in my mind, have become sort of numb to news. And I can tell you, where within like the political area I'm in, I think they're still kind of numb to it. I don't see it making the huge impact it should have, even though, you know, it concluded that the FBI should never have launched the full Trump-Russia probe. I don't see that news really penetrating political circles in the way it would have 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, interesting. What do you think about Trump and DeSantis right now? You know, last time you was on my show, you said that you believe Trump's got to go big, put DeSantis on that ticket. You still feel that way?
I do, but I don't think it's worth it anymore for DeSantis. There's a point in politics where the person that was groomed as the successor, and I think in a lot of ways Trump did groom DeSantis as the successor, helped him become governor of his favorite state, the state he was in, Florida at the time. I don't think it's worth it for DeSantis anymore. Iowa was a disaster for Trump. Whether or not why he canceled that rally, we don't really know. But the point is DeSantis is gaining ground. And what I find interesting that people don't really talk about is when you run for president, it's a package deal with whoever your family is. The Obamas were as successful as they were in large part because of the family, because Michelle was very compelling. The kids were adorable. Everything seemed very cookie cutter, even though we might learn later it isn't. At the time in 2008, it did seem cookie cutter. DeSantis has a real advantage with his wife. His wife is a political superstar. His kids are young. They're too young to have any scandals whatsoever assigned to them, and they still will be too young for quite a long time for that. There is this sense of a conservative Republican Camelot, like with the Kennedys, that feel. Trump has a problem with Melania. She's not active in politics. She's not out there doing anything. She's not particularly compelling. He has an issue with that. And the more that DeSantis pushes his wife, Casey, out there, someone who's a breast cancer survivor who had a real career, the more he does that, the more you see the glaring hole in the Trump campaign that is Melania Trump, and it's really up to Trump to address that.
Yeah, as an interesting take on it. What's your take on the border, kid? Have you? I know you're a little bit further north than I am, but this border situation is not good right now, and it's getting worse by the day. What's your thoughts?
Well, I think it's not really surprising. The idea that Joe Biden is caught off guard by all of this is ridiculous. And I saw his immigration secretary, Mayorkas, say things like, well, we tried to prepare, and they did nothing to prepare whatsoever. This was always going to happen, and yet they're acting as if it's new news. I caution conservatives because I think the mainstream media has made an agreement somehow with the Biden administration to just downplay all of this. So they're not going to see the outrage on the mainstream media they think they are, even on Fox News. They're not going to see that huge, the crisis at the southern border. What are we going to do? Because the media knows it's not worth getting the views from the sort of hardline taglines and everything if it means Biden is out of office. So I don't think this is going to impact people as much as it seems it is, simply because the media is not going to cover it the way they should, honestly.
Yeah. How is the situation in the country right now playing in the young people's community? What's your thoughts?
I don't think young people are particularly unhappy, and I know that it drives conservatives crazy to hear that. But we've been losing the youth vote by a lot for many years. I mean, we've lost it 2-1 in 2018, and now it looks like it's 3 to 4 to 1 over there in 2022 in the midterms. Young people are unhappy about specific things, but we have an issue in that millions of young people are Democrats and liberals and socialists and communists. So they're looking at individual problems like student debt and going, that's horrible. They're looking at inflation, that's horrible. But Biden isn't getting the blame. There's some strange cognitive dissonance going on here where all these things are horrible, everything's on fire, but Biden isn't in trouble for it. And I don't know how to rectify that, because Republicans see that Biden is the problem and they understand he's done it, but they don't know how to communicate that to younger people. And there's this push right now with this ridiculous RNC Youth Advisory Council that I gave a comment for about an article about that this council is supposed to be trying to win the youth vote over and everything. I'm going to be honest with you. I think it's a bunch of kids who are neocons who've been sort of plucked from obscurity. One of these kids I've never heard of before. I've been in this for almost 5 years. The other one I personally think is a terrible leader and incompetent. So I don't understand how this council is going to reach anybody, but I think they're using this council as something they can point to when their donors eventually say, why did you lose another presidential election? Why didn't you focus on the youth vote? This council is going to be the thing they pin the blame on.
Yeah. Do you think Ronna McDowney needs to go?
Absolutely. She's so horrible and so incompetent. We've lost everything under her. And this Youth Advisory Council, that I'm sure she has to have a role in or have at least approved, because if she's the RNC chairwoman, this council is going to be her effort to try to win over the youth vote. I'm just going to be really honest. Another young boy in a nice suit telling you the same talking points does not matter. It doesn't matter. You can keep pushing him out and pushing all of these sort of Stepford wife versions of these people out. It doesn't impact anything. Meanwhile, Democrats are pushing forward on all fronts. Even if you see a couple liberal influencers be exposed, the operation is so deep. I mean, understand that at major concerts around this country for leftist celebrities or just singers who aren't clear about their political views, they have registration desks for voting led by Democrat organization and liberal organizations. We don't have any of that. So don't be fooled by this Youth Advisory Council or really any of the RNC efforts right now, because to really win the youth vote, you got to know that Ronna McDaniel's a failure and you got to have a complete new operation, and that's not happening.
That ain't happening, kid. Well, kid, it's good to hear from you. Thank you for a great interview, and keep them coming. And we'll have you on again very soon, dear. Looking forward to the next one. Always a pleasure, Miss Rose.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too, dear. Thank you. Bye-bye now. Magdalene Rose, everybody, put some fire to that house for her, and we're grateful that she was able to join us. We're grateful you'll be able to join us tonight at 9 o'clock for the Ron Edwards Show. And until then, McDonald out on this Tuesday afternoon, storming down here in Tennessee today. But see you tonight at 9 o'clock. Not as much as it'll be storming here on the Mike Files at 9 with the one and only Ron Edwards of the Ron Edwards Notebook. We're going to light it up again, 9 o'clock tonight. See you then. Until then, McDonald out on this Tuesday afternoon, 16th day of May. Put some fire in that house for me. We're grateful you're with us today. And we'll see you tonight. Lord willing, the creek don't rise. Until then, bye-bye.